Well, on Tuesday night, late-night talk show host Stephen Colbert dedicated the segment to ridiculing Fox News White House correspondent Peter Ducey for his questions that he asked President Biden regarding the war in Ukraine. Let's watch.
Yesterday, President Biden held a press conference, and he was asked a ridiculous question by a ridiculous man, Fox News reporter, and that one kid in high school who wears a suit to gym class, Peter Ducey. Jimmy, drop the deuce.
When you said a chemical weapon use by Russia would trigger a response in kind.
It will trigger a significant response.
What does that mean?
I'm not going to tell you. Why would I tell you? You got to be silly.
Remember? Yes. Remember how on last night's show I said that slapping is never, ever the answer? I'd like to file a one-time exemption on behalf of the President of the United States. And no, it's wrong, Lewis.
Gotta let him know.
It's wrong. Doocy did not stop there.
The world wants to know?
The world wants to know a lot of things. I'm not telling them what the response would be. Then Russia knows the response.
Mr. President,
all right, I'm going to take two more questions.
Peter Ducey, Fox News. I've got two more questions. First, what are the exact locations of all of America's troops? And can you give me the nuclear launch codes?
Well, friend of the show, Katie Halper, joins us now for her initial reaction, co-host of the Useful Idiots podcast and host of the Katie Halper Show. Katie, what did you think of this?
Well, I mean, I thought it was kind of pathetic because, you know, there was a time when Stephen Colbert was a kind of scathing critic of the media, of politicians, of the relationship between the media and politicians. His show, The Colbert Report, famously did that. And, of course, his White House Correspondents' Dinner shtick was really, really a great send-up of that relationship between the media and political elites. And he's kind of become the very thing that he used to so hilariously mock through his comedy. And watching him be the kind of lackey for political power is pretty upsetting, I would say.
Yeah, I don't even understand what did Doocy do wrong in that clip? It was it was fine. I mean, there's plenty to criticize about how the questions they get asked at these press briefings that are like, when are you starting World War III? Why aren't you starting World War III?
Right.
So
and Katie, let's be clear. He was asking about a Biden quote or an administration position that said that if there's a chemical weapon attack, there will be a response, quote, in kind.
Right, of course, which of course required follow-up. It's of course something that requires follow-up because it was, I mean, for Biden, I guess, compared to calling for regime change or telling the troops that they'd be in Ukraine, this was barely a gap.
Yes.
But, you know, what that sounds like is that if there's a chemical weapons attack, we will engage in a chemical weapons attack, which is not what apparently he meant. But, of course, you want to clarify that. And he responded in a way that Trump used to respond when asked about his plans to defeat ISIS. He would kind of get outraged and say he couldn't tell the plan because it was going to be a secret plan. But again, we see so many things that people were upset about with Trump are fine when Biden does it. And so Biden kind of, I mean, I don't like this. I'm not a fan of Doocy, but it was not at all unreasonable question. And Biden kind of gaslit him to make it seem like he had asked some question that was kind of inherently dangerous for national security and inherently out of bounds. And of course, a ridiculous thing to ask.
And then Colbert phoned in that isn't this funny that he did that? It was not even funny.
Yeah, it wasn't funny. Yeah. And of course, the joking about slapping reporters, imagine if that joke was made under Trump. I mean, that's what's so frustrating about this is that a lot of people were rightly outraged about what they saw as Trump's attack on the Fourth Estate. And he did have an attack on the Fourth Estate. He launched an attack on the Fourth Estate. The problem is Biden has continued that through one very salient example, of course, Julian Assange. And people should be up in arms about Biden's prosecution and persecution of Julian Assange, which is an attack on journalism and the free press. And it would be nice to see Colbert, using his voice to call on Biden to slap down that persecution and prosecution instead of basically cheerleading for Biden and enabling him and protecting him from very legitimate questions that any reporter would ask. You don't have to like Steve Doocy to think that.
Right. Let's go back to this, to Biden's answer. So he says, why would I tell you that? I'm not going to tell you that. And I think a lot of people watching might even say, well, that's fair enough, because you don't want to, as Stephen Colbert said, reveal the location of the troops. But is that true in this situation? Because it seems like, especially if it's going to be, okay, if Russia does X, Y, Z, then we're going to punish them. Wouldn't you tell them in advance what that punishment might be? Is there a reason to keep this quiet, like as if this is we need some element to surprise for a retaliation?
Yeah, I mean, in theory, and this speaks to, I think, a lack of diplomacy that we've been seeing throughout this entire war with Ukraine, which is that the urgency should be around negotiations and around diplomacy. And so you would want to say something like this as a deterrent, right? You'd want to say something like this in theory to prevent people from engaging in chemical warfare. And so you'd want to say something and tell them. But I think the problem is, and we saw this with Obama, Obama said that was a red line with Syria, and then he wasn't able to, he didn't follow up on that. Now I think that was the right thing to do. And I think Obama has been a lot more prudent when it comes to these issues than we've seen Trump, obviously, but also Biden. Again, famously, Obama decided not to arm Ukraine because he saw it as a intractable proxy war. Then Democrats were up in arms that Trump didn't reverse it, so he did reverse it, and now Biden, of course, continued that. But I think that's probably what it's about, is that they're trying to saber rattle with Russia without being kind of hamstrung into a particular response to them.
Hey, Katie, what this also seems to reveal, the fact that Colbert thought that this was a bad question and thought that all of this was funny, shows that he doesn't think the media should be taking what Biden says, either seriously or literally. Like, that seems to be the joke. Like, Doocy's mistake was hearing Biden say, we will respond in kind to a chemical weapons attack, and not having the sophistication to immediately be like, well, that doddering old man didn't really mean that, and just moving on.
Yeah, it is pretty infantilizing,
his crime was taking Biden seriously and asking him, do you really mean to threaten Russia with the chemical weapons attack? Is that really?
Right.
You're just supposed to assume that what he says is untrue, which is what a dangerous and weird place to be at.
It is a dangerous and weird place to be at. It's also kind of a dig on Biden. But this doddering old man, how could you dare to take him seriously, as you're saying, Ryan? Like, what's wrong with you? Don't you know this guy constantly flubs things and gaffes, and let him have his fun?
Yeah, and apparently he's not really the president or something, like he's not really running the show. Don't listen to that guy.
Yeah, no big deal. NBD, no big deal. Just talking about war, chemical weapons, responding to a nuclear power. Yeah.
Yeah. Katie, this week on your podcast, you spoke to the Answer Coalition's Brian Decker about the Biden administration's and most U.S. media outlets' consistent efforts to manufacture consent to escalate the war further. Let's check that out.
You're going to see women, young people stand in the middle in front of a damn tank, just saying, I'm not leaving. I'm holding my ground. They're incredible. But they take a lot of inspiration from us.
The way they're talking about it is like, wow, the Ukrainians are really taking it on the chin. They're very heroic. But again, when you hear them, it's not the kind of, there's nothing that says in their voice or in their message, that's why we have to stop this. We have to find a way to end it. It's really like, that's why we're going to send more weapons. That's why we're going to send more American troops over to Poland and to Latvia and Lithuania and Estonia. Like, that's not the desire to end the war.
Yeah, what do you think about that? Biden kind of, look, the Ukrainian troops are, I think, heroic. They're defending their territory. They were invaded. This is a different kind of, this is a defensive war. It's not on their terms. They're being invaded. But, we want to be careful about the way we talk about that whole line about, like, drawing inspiration from us. They're drawing inspiration from the fact that it's their homes and their families and their friends who are being murdered, right?
Yeah, I think that what Brian was speaking to, and something that I think a lot of people on my show have talked about, I've been trying to emphasize, is that if you care about Ukraine and you care about Ukrainians, you'd want to do everything you can to negotiate a settlement and negotiate peace. And we don't see the United States doing that. I mean, they're absent in negotiations. And I think they're MIA, and I think that's really scary. And I do think that I've said this before on this show, but I think Ukraine is being used as a pawn in a proxy war. And we said, we saw Adam Schiff saying we have to fight Russia over there so we don't have to fight them over here, which is basically saying the quiet part out loud.
Right, and they've even been throwing cold water on talks when they do start to happen. But
right. And you, Ryan, had this great interaction with Jen Psaki where you were asking her if Zelensky was empowered to basically negotiate a peace on his own, and if the United States would agree to, stop sanctioning Russia if they did that. And she was very reluctant to say that. It was clear that the goal for the United States is not ending this. And they seem very happy to continue this. And you've seen Anthony Blinken and other members of the administration basically just forecast saying, buckle up, like this is going to be a long war. That's not what you want to hear. You want to hear the United States urgently trying to end a war, not telling people to get used to it.
That'd be nice. Katie Halper, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And we'll have more Rising right after this.